You're listening to the Deep End Podcast, a ministry of Hermitage Church, where we have a conversation about Sunday's sermon and chat about ways we can go a little deeper in our faith. I'm Hunter Steinmetz, and I'm one of the pastors here at our church. Every week, we will listen in on a conversation with the preacher from this week about deeper theological pieces of the sermon and suggested practices on how we can embody this word and allow it to seep into our skin. We hope that this podcast will become a part of your weekly faith journey on your drive into work, as you do the dishes, or as you sip your coffee on Tuesday mornings. Thanks for jumping into the deep end with us. Let's listen in on this week's conversation.
Welcome back to the Deep End Podcast. We're excited to be with you today. I'm Brad.
And I'm Hunter. And this Sunday, we will be in Isaiah 6. We're looking specifically at Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. And it's a powerful moment where the prophet Isaiah is called by God in a vision that is a little bit terrifying, all about the holy God and how we enter his presence, but also this kind of really beautiful calling story that you're probably familiar with. And I'll read that just so that we kind of have the context of the whole podcast. So this is Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, I is Isaiah, and I said, Woe is me! I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me.
Yeah, so a lot happening in that short chunk of scripture. But I think it'd be good for us to kind of just walk through who Isaiah is. We probably just Isaiah for scripture is like a household name, it seems like.
Yeah.
But to just really walk through what's going on in Israel at this point in history. And kind of like what is happening. What's this strange fiery vision of this winged beings and burning lips is trying to tell us here?
Yeah, so let's just start with Isaiah himself, and Isaiah the prophet. He is one of the major prophets in the Hebrew Bible. They're sometimes referred to as the major prophets and the minor prophets. It's not because some are more important than others. It's just because how long the scroll is. And Isaiah's scroll is one of the really longer ones. So he is one of the major prophets. And he lives in Judah, which is the southern kingdom. So quick history refresher. Remember when Israel finally gets a king, or they've had all these judges when they enter the promised land, and then they say, we want to be like everyone else. And so they ask for a king, and they get a king in Saul, and that doesn't go well. So then God finds David, and David becomes king, and then David's son Solomon becomes the king. And then there is a civil war, and all of Israel splits into 2 kingdoms, the northern kingdom, which is known as Israel, and the southern kingdom, which is known as Judah. And so Isaiah is a prophet to the southern kingdom in Judah, and this is while both of them they still have their own independence. Assyria has not yet come, but they're getting really close. So Isaiah is a prophet to the southern kingdom of Judah, and during a time of immense political and spiritual crisis, and this is roughly around 700 to 740 BC. So it's just before Assyria has taken over the northern kingdom, which happens in 722. That's a lot of information, but it's also really important that we can recognize that.
It is, yeah. And his ministry spans the reigns of 4 kings. So the prophets usually throughout Scripture are operating under political power, which would be the reigns of kings, and a lot of times,
but are separate from that political power.
yeah, absolutely, and most of their work is like truth telling in a sense. Is what the prophets are doing, and a lot of times the truth telling can be towards the powers of the time period.
Yeah, most of the time.
Yeah. So the four kings are Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. And Isaiah's not some fringe voice out in the wilderness, kind of like this John the Baptist figure in the New Testament, but he actually has access to the palace. And there is a lot of, or not a lot of, but some of the prophets in the Old Testament actually were in royal roles. They were kind of close to those in power and worked alongside, which is kind of interesting to think about. But it shifted at some point in Israel's history. But it suggests that he might have been of noble lineage or a temple-connected prophet.
Yeah, and sometimes they are friends of the king, and other times they are the thorn in the king's side. Like even Elijah, who comes later than this, I think, as far as timeline goes, even though it's earlier when you read it in Scripture, as in where it falls in the book. He is like the king wants to kill him because he has told the truth, and the king wants him dead because he's causing lots of issues. So that's not always friends of the king.
Was it David and Nathan, where Nathan spoke to?
Yeah, Nathan was the prophet to David,
and he spoke in that moment of David's. The story we all know with Bathsheba.
Yeah,
or was
you.
That?
Yeah,
Uriah.
Yeah, you are the man.
Yeah.
You are the man who has stolen the poor man's sheep, and he's like, I want this guy killed. Well, guess what? It's you. Like, oh man, yeah. So Isaiah is both a preacher and a poet, and his words are so rich in symbolism. There's lots of imaginative, very descriptive language here, even as we read, like all the different wings that the seraphs have. But his theology centers on God's holiness. This is kind of the main, and sometimes we can read this and be like, well, what is the seraph? I want to know all about the seraph, which is a good question to ask. It's not a bad question. But Isaiah's point is not really to tell us about the seraph. It's about the center is not the seraph. The center is God, and he is being undone because of how holy God is, and not oh man, what are these seraphs in my midst? So he really cares about God's holiness. He cares about justice. There is a great call to justice and the hope for a righteous king who can restore Israel to what Christians will later refer to as the Messianic hope, which then comes up with Jesus. And then Mark, at the beginning of his gospel, he quotes Isaiah many times.
So we'll now kind of talk about the world Isaiah is living in and connect kind of just what is happening. In Isaiah 6:1, he says, in the year that King Uzziah died, which is around 740 BCE, and that detail is kind of more than it's more than just a date, but it kind of symbolizes something that's happening within the time period of the people.
Yeah, King Uzziah had been a strong and mostly stable ruler, but in his later years, pride starts to get the better of him. And there's this interesting story, even towards the end of 2 Chronicles, that he tries to offer incense in the temple against the advice of the priests, and the priests are like, "You can't do this. Who do you think you are? This is the priest's job. It's something only the tribe of Aaron, the Aaronic priest, are allowed to do." But he does it anyway, and God strikes him with leprosy, and from then on, he kind of lives in isolation. So power had gotten to his head.
Yeah, and his death marks the beginning of kind of this downward spiral for Judah. Internationally, Assyria is rising. You mentioned earlier that at a certain point in Israel's history, Assyria comes and takes over. But they're kind of rising like this, like just a superpower. They're becoming this nation that's growing and growing and growing and growing, and they aren't nice. They're brutal and violent, and they are expanding incredibly fast.
And one more thing about Uzziah, like this really interesting thing where, hey, you're not allowed to do this. This is something only the priests do. What ends up happening in Jesus is Jesus becomes both of these roles. That he is the priest to end all priests in some ways. He's the king to end the whole king conversation. That those separate roles end up culminating in Jesus. whereas it was not allowed. God was very upset with King Uzziah for doing this. So that's a really interesting piece to me. That I love the symbolism of all those things that's happening in the Old Testament.
Thing in Jesus, king, prophet,
and priest,
priest together.
Yeah. That Jesus is also a prophet to Caesar and to the Pharisees. For both the religious kings, quote unquote kings, and the emperor of the time, who is Caesar. So. Yeah, now we'll leave Jesus aside. We'll go back to Isaiah. Domestically, like in the southern kingdom of Judah, it's totally falling apart. In the same way that Uzziah is trying to kind of bring power to himself, he's trying to take the priest job. Corruption, idolatry, greed, and injustice are everywhere. The leaders have become drunk on power. The poor are being swept under their feet. They're being crushed. And worship has just become something that they do. It's not really transforming them. And Isaiah is full of God's frustration with this kind of empty religion.
Yeah, and when the line worship is going through the motions, it made me think of one of the minor prophets, Joel, where it talks about, Joel says something like, I don't want you to wring out your garments anymore. It's like, I want you to wring out your hearts. But how, like, sometimes the things we can do on the outside can actually leave us empty on the inside, and where we're corrupt on the inside, which is exactly what has happened within the nation.
And what Jesus ends up saying to the Pharisees, you're just whitewashed tombs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You look so pretty on the outside, you dirty cups.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of language that keeps showing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in Isaiah's vision in chapter 6 is kind of this pivotal point, and it's this moment where his prophetic calling to speak truth to power is solidified, but it's also a window into what God is like in the middle of a national unraveling.
Yeah, so let's kind of walk through this moment piece by piece. Isaiah says, I saw the Lord sitting there on a throne, high and lifted up. And this is like king language, so you imagine Pharaoh sitting on a throne, or any king that sits on a throne. Isaiah sees the Lord sitting on a throne. He's above everything else. He's lifted up. It's kingly language. But we have to remember, too, that King Uzziah is now dead. And so Isaiah is making a point. The human kings die, but this true king, who is the Lord of hosts, he reigns forever.
Yeah, and to move more into the imagery, and the train of his robe fills the temple, is this image of majesty and overwhelming presence and holiness and glory. This is a vision of God that's uncontainable.
Yeah. Then we kind of what we were talking earlier about the seraphs, the seraphim. It's actually a Hebrew word. The "im" just makes it plural. Seraph, seraphim is what makes it plural. But the Hebrew is really like the burning ones. So they're like these snake-like figures that are on fire. It's this really interesting thing that we don't really have to get into. But each of them has 6 wings.
Not Cupid.
Yeah, it's not Cupid. 2 of them to cover their faces, 2 of them to cover their feet, 2 to fly. But even these, the seraphs, the seraphim, they don't even look directly at God. They are shielding their own eyes with 2 of their wings to not look at God out of reverence. Not totally sure, but all of the burning, like even what happens to Isaiah's tongue with the coal, is like it's purification language, it's holiness language, and so the seraphim, the burning ones. It's all of this holiness purification language that Isaiah is trying to use. It's less like, snakes. I thought that was the devil-like creature. It has more to do with purification and holiness language than it does evil and creature like snake-like language.
Yeah, and what they're saying in the vision is holy, 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 which that word holy can kind of throw us off a little bit in our modern context, but really it just means other. Is the Lord of hosts, like how
different. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like kind of probably what Isaiah is experiencing in relationship to the culture that he's living in, is he's encountering this God, and he's like, oh, I can't believe how different you are than how things are in the world. But holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And that 3-part repetition is very Hebrew. It's what kind of it's what Hebrew poetry does a ton. So in I think in some of the Psalms, you'll see like a 3-part repetition that happens. It's this emphasis, and the text is what the text is doing is trying to say, focus on this, focus on this. It's the only time in the Old Testament where God is described 3 times over as holy, this holy, holy, holy.
And we like, this is interesting for us as a holiness church, that we're like came out of the Church of Nazarene, comes out of the American holiness movement, that sometimes we equate holiness with making sure we do the right things and don't do the bad things, and that we just categorize our actions, and we want to call that holiness. But that's not really what's happening here. Holiness isn't really moral purity. Like what you were saying just a moment ago, it's otherness, it's separateness, it's differentness. So it's all of these things. It's like awe and danger and glory. And actually the Hebrew word for glory just means weight. Like there is so much other here. And it's so different than anything we've experienced. That's really what holiness means. So when they say that the earth is filled with God's glory or God's weight, it's like saying his presence is spilling out of this very temple and just like saturating the world.
Yeah, even more so what Isaiah is experiencing is like this shaking of the temple. Like that weight is shaking the temple, and the place fills with that heaviness, fills with smoke. Kind of taking us to Sinai imagery. It's as if Isaiah has stepped into the center of heaven and earth's meeting place, and he's like, "Whoa, is me. This is not safe."
Yeah, and this is actually the scriptural backing for fog machines in worship. I'm totally kidding.
I think we should get some.
Yeah, the place filled with smoke because they used the fog machine.
Scented?
Scented fog, yeah, essential oils. And Isaiah's immediate reaction to all of this is interesting. He is so humbled, and he says like, I am undone. Woe is me. Why am I here? That phrase, like I am undone, means like I am unraveling, I am disintegrating. Like the weight of the differentness of this God is doing something. It's transforming me. It's doing something to me, and I don't really know how to be in the presence of a God who is so different than me and still stand here. But then it's interesting what happens after that.
Yeah, he sees the holiness of God and realizes the depth of his own kind of difference between that God, the gap that's between. And he says, I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people of unclean lips.
And lips, obviously, representing speech, the way that we talk to one another about God and things. But also speech represents the heart because, out of the mouth or out of the heart comes the things out of the mouth. And Isaiah knows that he cannot even speak rightly before God. But this moment is not about God condemning who Isaiah is. It's more about God making him different, like God himself.
Yeah, then from that comes this beautiful, terrifying moment. One of the seraphim, one of these fiery creatures, flies to Isaiah with a live coal from the altar and touches his lips with it.
Yeah, and a burning coal on your lips is a really interesting, like, what is happening in this story? And yet Isaiah's concern is, I'm not even sure how to speak in the presence of this holy God. And God says, we can solve that problem. And God purifies his speech, burns his lips in a way that it burns away all of the things that made his lips unclean from the unclean people. And it's not to punish him, but rather to purify him. And the coal comes from that place of sacrifice, which is the altar. And it symbolizes that God is choosing to make Isaiah clean. It's not punishment. Yeah. He's making him like him, which is so beautiful.
Yeah, I love too thinking of like the coal actually burns him, which it reminds me of the Jacob story where Jacob wrestles with God and he dislocates his hip. Like something about Isaiah is physically changed.
Yeah.
Like on the externally, but even more so internally.
Yeah, there is an external image for the internal thing that has happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which
It's
is
like baptism. It's an outward sign of an inward work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is it's so cool. And then from that comes this question: whom shall I send, and who will go for us?
And Isaiah, I suppose, after he feels as if he has been made like God, after what God has done for him, Isaiah says, and the Hebrew is Hanani, which happens all of the time in the Old Testament. Here I am, send me. And it's often like romanticized. We hear it in songs, or it's like you put your hand on your head. Here am I, send me. But he really knows that he is not signing up for an easy job, because he knows that he now has clean lips, but he has to go back to the people with unclean lips. But he has been wrecked and remade by an encounter with the differentness and the holiness of God. And his calling does not end well, and God actually tells him this. It will lead you to have to confront the kings, and they're going to fight hard against you. You're going to suffer rejection. It's not going to be good.
Yeah, the verses after verse 8 makes that clear. God tells Isaiah that the people will not listen. The message will harden their hearts. It's like, how long will this be? And God is like, long.
It's not going to be good, man.
Yeah. And Isaiah still goes, which is kind of the same thing, similar to us, as we still plant seeds that we might not see the growth for, but we continue to plant seeds. We continue to.
Yeah. And I think even in ways that the church is really trying to be faithful today. I think it's okay to say, how long will this go? And God says, probably a long time.
Yeah.
But as long as you come into my presence and recognize that you are people, that you have unclean lips and you belong to a people with unclean lips, I will continue to purify you and make you like me.
Yeah.
And still send you out.
Yeah. There's still Assyrian empires that try to show us a different way. There's still Babylonian empires that try to show us a different way. But there's there's still the presence of a holy God who shows us that there is a truer way. Yeah.
And it should maybe not make us feel better, but at least help us feel seen. That the very, like Isaiah the prophet, doesn't fix the world. He lives in it faithfully and speaks to it. And God recognizes that, well, I don't think you're going to be able to fix it. Yeah. But you have to speak to it. So it's this. Good luck on Sunday, Pastor Matt. Isaiah 6. We would love to see you on Sunday. Thanks for listening.